Greetings, mortals. It is I, Remortis, bringing you another guide for Baldur's Gate 3. This time with the often requested and often smiting Lockadin, or the Paladin Warlock multiclass. Combining the Paladin's solid chassis with the Warlock's invocations and Pact of the Blade makes the Lockadin a formidable foe with the ability to keep on smiting. We'll go over what the Paladin and Warlock brings to the table. Origin, racial, and stat options, leveling guides, items to look out for, and a bit of a quick guide at the start, with an items section at the end. There will be timestamps below to skip to what you're looking for. Let's get into it, shall we? Since we've covered the Paladin and the Warlock in previous videos before, we'll just cut straight to the chase as to why this combo works so well. Most notably, the Warlock's Pact of the Blade feature allows you to focus all of your stats on Charisma, instead of having to split between both Charisma and Strength, which will further empower a lot of your Paladin features, which is probably one of the best reasons to do this combo, since we have so few stats to spread around with the point-buy system. Not to mention that Charisma is one of the best stats to have for your main character, since they'll be doing most of the talking to NPCs. And the Pact of the Blade's level 5 upgrade provides an extra attack that stacks with the extra attack provided from martial classes, providing a total of 3 attacks per attack action per round, not including bonus actions. And not only that, but the one flaw the Paladin has is that it is crippled by long rests, and gets none of its features back on a short rest. However, after reviewing and recording, I've come to realize that the Channel Oath features do actually get refreshed on short rests. I could have sworn it was on long rest for the life of me, but I'm mistaken. Although your lay on hands charges and spell slots still need long rest, so you'll still be out of smites, which is what the main source of your damage is from. That being said, it is still pretty sweet to have your Channel Oath abilities come back on a short rest, which actually makes the Ancient's Paladin a whole lot stronger, since you can have so much healing whenever you short rest. Either way, sorry for that confusion. The Warlock provides spell slots on a short rest to keep fueling your smites. While it's not a lot, it can help your adventuring days last a bit longer. And well, that's the gist of it. Thanks for watching. Alright. We'll take a deeper look as to what makes this a solid combo throughout the game. We'll first start with the Paladin. The Paladin will give us the ability to wear heavy armor, a fighting style, some decent support spells, auras, smites, and each oath provides sweet flavor options with different spells and abilities that they provide. Now let's get into those oaths. Oath of the Ancients grants you a very solid known spell list, and a really good Channel Oath feature at level 1, probably the strongest out of the other level 1 oath features. Healing Radiance, a pulsing healing aura that scales with Paladin levels and your Charisma, which restores your proficiency bonus, plus your Paladin level, plus your Charisma modifier, in a 10-foot radius, when you cast it, and at the start of your next turn, which is very potent, especially during high damage encounters, and some of your allies are consistently dying, since all you need is a little heal to get a pick-me-up. Their level 3 oath features are okay, but are pretty bleh, actually. I'd save the Channel Oath for the healing aura. Its level 7 aura, however, provides resistance to all damage from spells, which is really strong. Its tenets can be a bit strict, but as long as you encourage freedom and the balance of nature while trying to do the right thing overall, you'll be just fine. Oath of Devotion is probably on the weaker side of the oaths. Its spell list is very bland, not really offering us anything notable, which is okay, which just means that those spell slots are really just smite slots, let's be honest. Its only passable Channel Oath ability is Sacred Weapon, which allows you to add your Charisma bonus to hit, which can be quite useful for this build. Its level 1 ability, however, is completely awful. Holy Rebuke, which makes an ally, again, can't be yourself, deal 1d4 radiant damage anytime they're damaged by a melee attack. It's negligible damage, and you really don't want to be hit in the first place. Not worth your Channel Oath ability. Turn the Unholy can be useful in a handful of encounters in Baldur's Gate 3, but Sacred Weapon will be your go-to. The tenets of this oath are the most strict, in my opinion. Essentially, you have to act like Superman. Just, kind, defender of the weak, never cheat, and never stealing. And you shall maintain this oath. Oath of Vengeance is a very strong oath on tabletop. In Baldur's Gate 3, it is still pretty solid. Its spell list really suits the theme for hunting down that big enemy. Has a lot of really good spells here, like Misty Step and Hold Person, for example. Its level 1 feature isn't too bad either. Inquisitor's Might causes you and an ally's attack to deal additional radiant damage. It can combo with your other features just fine, but that would require a lot of setup and too many bonus actions to spare to do so. Although it can be better suited by being cast on an ally instead of yourself. Typically someone who can hit multiple times, such as a dual-wielding crossbow user, or maybe even a monk. Abjure Enemy can be used to frighten an enemy in place, but Vow of Enmity is why we're here. It's the boss killer, the Channel Oath ability that grants advantage on a target for 10 turns. This is also what makes the Oath a bit weak too. Because once you kill that target, it's over. You can't transfer that vow to other targets, like other abilities. So save it for a bigger target for an upcoming boss fight. That said, there are items in the game that will help you regain your Channel Oath slots. And as for the tenets, this is probably the easiest to maintain. Fight the bigger evil, do not betray, and no mercy for the wicked. You don't have to be a goody two-shoes as this paladin either. This is probably the only oath that can easily be played in an evil campaign as well as good. Other than Oathbreaker, of course. And speaking of the Oathbreaker, they can be quite powerful too, especially if you take advantage of its features. Its spell list is okay, some decent damaging spells, though nothing too crazy. There are some spells that can be used in tandem with your other features, which just means we don't have to worry about losing out on smite slots, just like Devotion. Let's start with their level 7th aura feature first, Aura of Hate, which increases their damage and any damage from undead and fiends within 10 feet, equal to your charisma bonus. If you have a Spore Druid or a Necromancer Wizard or anyone animating undead, you can make them hit harder from them being near your Oathbreaker, but keep in mind this applies to enemies as well. Their other oath features are pretty solid too. Spiteful Suffering, which will let you mark a target and grant anybody that attacks that target advantage. So it's kind of like the Vow of Enmity from Vengeance, but applies to everybody. So say you had a horde of zombies, for example, well now they all have advantage to hit that target, which can make a really crazy snowball effect since whenever a zombie hits something, well, you can find out for yourself. It's pretty fun. The other two options that the Oathbreaker have is Control Undead, which will let you control a powerful undead creature, or any undead creature for that matter, but you want to use it on a powerful one. But the caveat is it has to be a lower level than you. So if you're level 7, you have to cast it on a level 6. And it's based on your paladin level, not your character level. There are a few pretty strong undead in the game that you can use this on, and you can also maintain control of them if you roll correctly. And your last Channel Oath ability is an AoE Fear, which can be very useful in certain situations. All in all, I really enjoy the Oathbreaker, and one of the other reasons I really like them is for how freeing it is in terms of your roleplay, since you can finally answer how you truly feel and not within the confines of your oath. And you still have most of the awesome paladin goodness. And keep in mind, you can be good or evil as an Oathbreaker. Just because you like to hang out with undead doesn't make you evil. But if you aren't planning on using undead or fiends, you might not want to be an Oathbreaker. Just something to keep in mind. Warlocks are another very strong class in Baldur's Gate 3. They are very customizable thanks to their invocations and pact boon options, in addition to their patron choices. While they do only gain 2 spell slots for the majority of the game, they'll refresh them anytime they take a rest, whether it be short or long, which lets them fight at full power more often than other spellcasting classes. The better invocations to choose from, in my opinion, are Agonizing Blast and Repelling Blast. Agonizing allows us to add a Charisma modifier to Eldritch Blast, which applies to each beam of Eldritch Blast. This is a pretty good option for the Lockadin because sometimes you can't always get into melee, so that way you have no true wasted turn, and you can keep putting out damage as you're closing in on your enemies. Repelling Blast lets each beam knock an opponent back, and knockback is very strong in Baldur's Gate 3, whether it's knocking them off of cliffs, heights, or just back into danger. The other invocations can be solid too, but they are typically meant as utility, so pick what you like. As for pact boons for this build, Pact of the Blade is the one true option, and that's where it's always at, which allows us to focus only on charisma rather than worrying about strength, or any other stat for that matter. And with this build, we'll also get access to the Warlock spell, Hunger of Hadar, which I personally think is one of the best concentration spells in the game. It blinds people, it slows them, and while they're stuck in the AoE, they are taking damage whenever they begin and end their turn in it. It can completely trivialize so many fights, especially if you can keep knocking your enemies back into it. The AI just does not know how to handle it. As for patron choices, it really depends on how many levels of Warlock you're investing. I typically enjoy 5 levels of Warlock for this build, and the rest of the Paladins for a reason we'll get to in a moment. For that reason, I believe Fiend or the Great Old One to be your best patron choices for the build. I know some folks, like Colby at D4 Deep Dive, really enjoys the Archfey patron to get access to greater invisibility at level 7, which is huge, I'll admit, but that won't be able to exploit the 3 attacks given by this build. Fiend will also give us a solid temporary HP generation when we kill things to keep us a bit more healthy, which can actually add up to a lot of damage prevented over the course of the game. And the Great Old One is a solid build choice too, especially if we have ways to maintain advantage, which will in turn give us even more crits. So free potential fears from critting things can be pretty sweet. If we had access to Conquest Paladin, I would go Great Old One for sure. But sadly, until mods come out, or if we get an update with that, we won't have it yet. Hopefully it comes out soon because there are some characters in the game that are Conquest Paladins and their abilities are completely functioning. Anyways, with realizing what each class brings to the table, here are some potential combos I could see for the build, for both mechanical and RP reasons. Which would be Devotion 6 and either a Fiend or a Great Old One 6, because level 7th Devotion aura is not very good, and you might want the level 6 feature from Fiend or Great Old One. Vengeance 7 and Great Old One 5, since 7 has a lot of ways to get advantage, and that means you'll crit more, why not get some fears on top of that? Ancient 7 and Archfey 5 are a very thematic combo since they're both Fey. However, in Ode to Colby's build, you might want to do Ancients 5 and Archfey 7. That way you can still get the 3 attacks and still get greater invisibility. But personally, I value the Paladin Rs more, since we can get invisibility through other means. And lastly, we have the Oathbreaker 7 and either Fiend or a Great Old One 5 for that Death Knight flavor. With all that being said, any of these can combine well mechanically, such as Ancient 7 and Fiend 5, which would provide a lot of sustain options for your Paladin. For origin and racial options, I believe Will, Lae'zel, and the Dark Urge can fit the bill for this playstyle quite well, without getting into their stories or personalities too much. Oh, and I guess Minthara too, for that matter. As for races, any of them work, honestly, pick whatever you'd like. I tend to favor that have more spell options. Dwergar is a very powerful option here, since you can get invisibility and enlarge, which are both fantastic abilities for this build. You could also go with the half-work if you intend to do a lot of crit fishing, to get those even bigger weapon damage attacks. Alright, now on to the build. So personally, I think starting level 1 in Paladin is the way to go. You'll be granted access to heavy armor, you'll be able to get martial weapons, but none of that stuff really matters once you get your packed weapon, since you can bind any item to you and you'll be proficient with it. That being said, we'll be just doing a demo on Lae'zel for this build. We'll be starting as an Oath of Vengeance Paladin. Again, any of these Paladins will be fine. As for stats, I think this to be the optimal option for our Lockadin. 14 in Strength, 12 in Dexterity, 14 in Constitution, and 8 Intelligence and 10 Wisdom, with a 17 in Charisma. Now the reason why we want to have so much Charisma is because we'll eventually be using Charisma for our attacks and for most of our features. The reason why we'll be leaving it at 17 is because early in Act 1, you have an option to let somebody go, and you'll be given an item that will increase a stat, which we would increase Charisma to make it 18, since we're not going to be able to get a feat to increase that really ever in the build. Up to you, though. And as for skill proficiencies, what it gives you right away is totally fine. So at level 2, pick up Great Weapon Fighting or Dueling if you want to use a one-handed weapon and a shield, which is totally fine, since most of our damage is going to be coming through our smites anyways. I personally would go to level 2 Paladin just to get your smites online as soon as possible. And then at level 3, we can either choose to continue being a Paladin to level 5, and then get Warlock at level 6, or we can switch to Warlock right now at level 3. And we won't come back to the Paladin until after we get our extra attack. I personally think this is the way to go. Yeah, you're going to be delaying your extra attack a little bit, but you want to get those smites online as soon as possible, and the Warlock features are just really lend itself well in the early game and with all the short rests you'll be having. For cantrips, obviously you want Eldritch Blast, and for the other cantrip, I really suggest Friends to get advantage on a lot of skill checks with NPCs early in the game. For subclass, you really can't go wrong with the Fiend or the Great Old One. Archfey can have its niches, depending on what you want to go. I personally really enjoy the Fiend Warlock myself. The free temporary hit points it gives you is just really, really nice. As for the spells, I like Armor of Agathis and Hunger of Dar. Can't go wrong here. We'll pick up Hex next level. At player level 4 and Warlock level 2, we now have Hex, which will be fantastic if we want to really combo some multiple attacks. For our Eldritch Invocations, we want to have Agonizing Blast and Repelling Blast. You can switch out Repelling Blast with any of these other utility with any of these utility invocations. However, I really think Repelling Blast is the way to go in this game, since there's just so much verticality. Agonizing Blast is a must. You'll be a fool to not take it. Now we're player level 5, when the build can finally start coming together, since we can pick up our Pact boon in the Pact of the Blade. So, a few cool things about this ability. First, I guess for spells, you can pick Invisibility. Why not? Alright, so the thing about Pact of the Blade, before we keep advancing in other levels, we'll talk about that real quick. We can choose to bind a Pact weapon. So any weapon we have in our inventory, or whatever, we can use bind Pact weapon, and if we click on ourselves, it'll automatically bind the weapon that we have equipped. Do that, and now we can use our charisma for our attacks, which is fantastic. Now, say you don't have the particular weapon you want, or you haven't found a good one yet. You can use the actual Pact of the Blade itself to conjure a weapon that you want, whether it be a battle axe, a warhammer, a trident, rapier, a greatsword, or a glaive. So the fact that you can get a greatsword or a glaive out of this is pretty sweet. I would probably go for the glaive option just because there aren't too many glaives in the early game. There are some, don't get me wrong, but this will be a magical one. One thing to note though is if you do pick things like trident or whatever, you can't throw your pact weapon, which is really sad. I mean, yeah, on tabletop you get it back, but that's the point in tabletop is you could throw your weapon like a boomerang and you'd get it back. But that's neither here nor there. So yeah, like I said, you could pick a glaive, which is pretty sweet. And at level 4, we get our feet. And you could definitely pick up Polar Master, which is very fantastic for paladins, because you get the 2 attacks, or eventually you'll get your 2 main attacks, and eventually 3. And you get to attack with the butt end of the weapon, and that's what's really important, because you can use that to smite as well. But one thing to note, if you are playing Lae'zel, I personally do not try to do the Polearm Mastery, just because I feel like a Githyanki should be using a nice beefy 2-handed sword, for flavor reasons. But of course, do what you want. Optimally, picking Polearm Master is a very good option for this build. Otherwise, you can, instead of at level 4, instead of picking the Polearm Master, you can pick up the Great Weapon Master, which is always really good. Those are going to be the 2 feats we'll be picking in this build anyways, so whichever one you want first is fine. If you don't mind, if you do plan on using polearms, I would definitely get Polearm Master first, because it's just really, really good with the Paladin. Being able to smite on any attack, getting that free reaction attack, especially since you'll be knocking things away with your Eldritch Blast or your other party members. We'll get another cantrip. You can pick up Bone Chill, because there are some things that have a lot of high healing in the game, and you might want to stop that. And then for spells, pick whatever you want. Maybe you need some. Maybe you could pick Shadow for some emergency AoE damage, or Cloud of Daggers. Cloud of Daggers is really good, but I don't think it's really good for this option. You could pick up Misty Step, but we will be getting that eventually from our Vengeance Paladin line. If you're not playing a Vengeance Paladin, then obviously you might want to pick up Misty Step from your Warlock. So for this one is a Vengeance Paladin, so we'll be picking Shatter for here. And I'll just be picking Polearm Master just for the fun of it, even though I think she should be using a 2-hander. Alright, now we're player level 7 and Warlock level 5. This is when we get our extra attack, which is fantastic, but for my favorite reason to get level 5 Warlock is we get access to Hunger of Hadar, which is a very, very good concentration damaging spell. It just does so much to do. It just does so much to manipulate the fights and just completely trivialize so many encounters in the game. Anyways, we also get access to another Eldritch Invocation, and there are a few decent options to pick from. You could pick Devil's Sight to get be able to see through magical darkness. However, keep in mind that darkness in the game also blinds you, like the spell darkness I meant, which is very unfortunate because Devil's Sight does not prevent that. Hopefully, either that gets fixed, or maybe they can somebody can buff Devil's Sight to have to be immune to blindness, which would be pretty sweet. But pick whatever you want. But pick whatever invocation you want. Maybe you want some utility. Hey, maybe you need an animal speaker. Why not have your charisma guy do it? There you go. Easy day. Alright. Now we are player level 8. At this point in the game, things have been getting pretty intense. And I think it's time for us to start going back into Paladin. And for prepared spells, you obviously pick whatever you'd want. Blast is always a good option for better hitting, but we'll get into the spell stuff near the end of the build. Continue our Paladin levels to level 4. For the feat here, pick whichever feat you didn't last time. So say if you picked Polearm Master last time, let's pick up Great Weapon Master. If you decided not to pick up the Great Weapon Master or Polearm Mastery, say if you're doing the Sword and Shield variant, which is still very strong, don't get that twisted. You can either increase your ability improvements, you can get Charger, you can get Spell Sniper if you really want to lend into that Eldritch Blast scenario. What else we got? We got Mobile, which can be okay, I guess. Warcaster is always phenomenal. You can never go wrong with that. Heavily Armor Master can be pretty good too, especially since some of the heavy armors in the game will reduce damage you take as well. So this would just stack on top of that, and you would take hardly any non-magical damage, which is pretty sweet, especially with all those assassins and rogues later. Yeah, that's pretty much it at this point. But yeah, most people will probably be doing the great weapons, so you might want to do that too. Not that you don't have to. You can definitely do sword and board. Play how you want. Alright. And now we are at player level 10. With Paladin 5 and Warlock 5. We get extra attack here, and we have extra attack from the Warlock. And it looks, if you read here, it says that if you get extra attack from other classes, they do not add together. Which is interesting, since this extra attack definitely does, so maybe that will get fixed in the near future. Hopefully it doesn't. If it does, that's not too big of a deal. And at this point in the build, it's pretty much done. You can stay continuing level 7 Paladin and being level 5 Warlock. That's fantastic. You get your Paladin R to increase a lot of your saving throws, and then your unique level 7 feature from whatever Paladin you are. But you could also decide to go to level 7 Warlock, because some of the level 7 spells are really good, depending on your patron choice, such as the Archfae's Greater Invisibility. Or maybe you also just really like the Warlock level 6 features. The Fiend Warlocks is okay. I don't really particularly care for it. The Great Old Ones is a pretty nice reaction. And the Archfae's is also a pretty good defensive option to get. So just keep that in mind. But ultimately at 5 and 5, you are at the full potential of this build, and you'll be smiting the streets of Baldur's Gate quite easily with this. Alright, on to the items. In Baldur's Gate 3, there are plenty of really good magical items. And here's some magical items that will help us with our Lockadin build in Act 1. Starting with Gloves of Heroism. Whenever you use a Channel Oath spell, you gain the effects of Heroism, which means you can't be frightened, and you'll gain 5 temporary hit points per turn. And you also get +1 to your strength saving throws. One thing to keep in mind though is if you end up picking the Fiend Warlock patron, the Heroism temporary hit points and your Fiend temporary hit points will not stack with each other. The Helmet of Smiting you can find in the Temple of Saloon in the Underdark, and whenever you use a spell smite, like Searing or Thunderous, for example, you can gain temporary hit points based on your Charisma modifier. This helmet is not too crazy because I personally never use those spells too often, since it uses an action and a bonus action. But sometimes there's a really good spot when you might want to use them. It's a decent helmet, and at least it looks cool. Then we'll move on to the Whispering Promise. Whenever you heal a creature, you will gain the effects of the Bless spell. Pretty sweet. Combine that with Hellraider's Pride. Whenever you heal a creature, it will gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, also known as giving them the resistance cantrip, which is a pretty not great cantrip on its own, but getting it for free whenever you heal somebody is pretty nice, especially if you're that Ancient's Paladin with the AoE heal. And then you can come across this really beautiful two-handed sword if you were a naughty person. And perhaps you might have came across this if somebody outside of a burning inn met an untimely demise. It's a really good sword though. Just be careful how you might come about it, as you don't want to break your oath after all. And in Act 2, there are even more good items. These two items are both from vendors. The Halberd of Vigilance is an amazing polearm that I've used all the way up to and through Act 3 on some of my runs. And the Armor of Devotion is just a full plate mail, but it gives you the ability to refresh your Channel Oath ability once per long rest, which is pretty nice, but I don't understand why its price tag is so hefty. You might want to have one of your thieves or somebody try to get that off their hands for you. Just be careful, because it's a little tricky where this vendor is at. Anyhow, these are just some of the samples of items you can find in the game. Obviously, there are better stuff out there, and depending on what kind of paladin you are, you might consider different weapons. For Vengeance Paladins, I highly, highly recommend being a polearm user with the polearm master feat, since the level 7th ability of Vengeance Paladins combines really well with polearm master. And of course, great weapon fighting is also really good for paladins, but keep in mind you might not have many ways to compensate for that minus the hit penalty. That being said, Devotion Paladins can be very good users of great weapon fighting because their Sacred Oath ability gives them just a straight up plus charisma bonus to hit, on top of your other charisma bonus to hit if you're using the pack weapon. Vengeance Paladins can use great weapon fighting pretty decently since they can get advantage through Vow of Enmity. And of course you can get advantage through other ways as well. It's just some food for thoughts. Anyhow, I really hope you guys enjoyed this guide. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more like these. And also comment down below of what you would like to see next. Or you can also tell me just how wrong I am and how you like to build your Lockadin. Either way, thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Farewell for now.